They called him Samson, the fat slave too slow to work, too soft to fight, too broken to dream. On Beaumont Plantation, his size was a joke, his silence their sport. Every lash, every laugh, carved something quiet and dangerous beneath his skin. But when Master Beaumont ordered Samson to dig 3 graves, 1 for his wife, 2 for his children, something inside him finally broke. The shovel meant for the dead became a weapon of freedom. Blood hit the dirt before the sun rose, and the fields that once echoed with laughter now held their screams. With his family bleeding beside him and bounty hunters on their trail, Samson led them through swamp and fire toward the promise of the north, where freedom waited like a ghost just out of reach. They said he was too heavy to run, too slow to fight, but they never saw what a desperate man carries when love weighs more than chains. Because when the masters fell, the world learned one truth: even the slowest man can outrun the devil, if his family's life depends on it. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The sun rose angry and red over Beaumont Plantation. Heat already shimmered above the endless rows of sugarcane like a living thing, hungry for sweat and suffering. Samson Grady straightened his back, as much as his tired muscles would allow, and wiped his brow with a large forearm. The cane knife felt small in his hand, like a child's toy. His breathing came heavy in the thick morning air. "Move faster, hogman!" Overseer Hollis's voice cracked through the humid stillness. "My grandmother cuts faster than you, and she's been dead 10 years. Samson kept his eyes down, focusing on the next stalk of cane. His large body moved with careful purpose, each swing measured. Not too fast to tire quickly, not too slow to draw more attention. Nearby, his wife Martha worked with quick, practiced motions, her thin arms moving like clockwork. Their son Elias, all of 12 but strong for his age, struggled to keep pace with the adults. Little Annie, just 8 and too small for fieldwork, carried water to the others. "Look at him sweating like a stuck pig," Hollis called out to the other field hands. "Samson the ox, biggest slave on the plantation and half as useful." A few nervous laughs rippled through the field. No one looked at Samson. They knew better. Laughter was survival. Laugh at someone else or become the next target. Martha glanced at her husband, her eyes holding a quiet warning. Don't respond. Just endure. Samson cut another stalk, his face a mask of nothing. He had learned long ago to lock his thoughts away where no one could see them. The white folks thought his slow movements and quiet ways meant he was simple. They never bothered looking deeper. The sound of hoofbeats approached from the main house. Silas Beaumont, the plantation master, rode toward them on his chestnut mare, immaculate in his white linen suit despite the heat. He pulled up alongside Hollis, who straightened and touched his hat brim. "Problems, Hollis?" Beaumont's voice carried the soft drawl of old Louisiana money. "Just motivating the livestock, sir." Hollis grinned, pointing his whip toward Samson. "This one moves like molasses in January." Beaumont turned in his saddle, regarding Samson with cold amusement. "Still feeding that one full rations, Hollis? He ain't worth the feed he eats." He laughed, the sound sharp as broken glass. "Work him harder or sell him off? I don't keep useless meat on my property." "Yes, sir, Mr. Beaumont," Hollis answered, his smile widening. "I'll see he earns his keep." Samson didn't look up, but he felt Elias tense beside him. The boy had his mother's quick mind and his father's strength, but none of Samson's hard-learned patience. That worried Samson more than any overseer's whip. Beaumont rode away, and Hollis cracked his whip against Samson's back. Not hard enough to break skin, just enough to burn. "You heard the master. Work faster, or I'll give you something to remember me by." Hollis turned to the others. "That goes for all of you. Sun's barely up, And you're moving like it's Sunday." The day dragged on, the sun climbing higher, baking the earth and everyone on it. By evening, when the slaves finally returned to the quarters, Samson's shirt clung to his back, stiff with dried sweat and spots of blood where Hollis's whip had found him later in the day. Inside their small cabin, Martha dipped a rag in a bowl of water, mixed with herbs, and dabbed at the welts on Samson's back. The cabin was little more than 4 walls and a dirt floor, but Martha had made it clean as she could. Annie sat in the corner, humming softly to herself as she played with a corn-husk doll Martha had made. "Hold still," Martha whispered. "These need cleaning." Elias paced by the small window, his young face tight with anger. "Why do you let them talk to you that way, Pa? Why don't you—" "Hush that talk." Samson's voice was low but firm. "Those thoughts get people killed." "But you're stronger than Hollis. You could—" "Elias!" Martha's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Your father knows what's best. Now sit and be quiet." Elias sat reluctantly on his sleeping mat, but his eyes burned with unspoken words. Samson sighed. The boy had a fire in him that was dangerous in a place where survival meant keeping your head down. As darkness fell, whispers moved between the cabins. Samson heard the news as it passed from mouth to ear. Jonas and Ruth, a young couple from the East Field, hadn't been seen since yesterday evening. They'd run. Martha's hands paused on Samson's back. "Lord, have mercy on them," she whispered. "They won't get far," Samson said flatly. "They never do." "They might," Elias insisted. "The north ain't so far. There's people who help. I heard—" "What you heard will get you killed," Samson interrupted. "Freedom costs more than you know, boy." Martha finished tending his wounds, and they ate their meager supper, cornmeal mush with a few scraps of salt pork. After, they lay on their thin pallets in the darkness, but sleep came fitfully in the heavy heat. Just before dawn, the baying of hounds shattered the night's silence. Samson sat up immediately, his heart pounding. The dogs meant only one thing. Shouting voices carried across the plantation. Lanterns bobbed in the darkness like evil spirits. Then came the sound they all dreaded, a gunshot echoing from the direction of the swamp. "They got one," Martha whispered, clutching Annie, who had woken crying. Hollis's voice carried clearly through the thin walls of the cabin. "Found one body in the swamp. The other one's still running." Samson looked at his family, huddled together in the gray pre-dawn light. He gathered them close, his large arms encircling his wife and children like a fortress. Annie's small body trembled against his chest. Elias was rigid with fear, trying to be brave. Martha's eyes met Samson's over their children's heads. They didn't need words. They both knew what came after a failed escape. Examples would be made. Punishment would rain down on all of them, guilty or not. Samson held his family tighter as the shouts grew closer. The day of reckoning was coming with the dawn. The midday sun beat down mercilessly as slaves and overseers gathered in the main yard. Samson stood with his head bowed. Martha and the children huddled close beside him. A commotion at the edge of the property drew everyone's attention. "Got her! We got the other one!" Hollis's triumphant voice rang out. 2 men dragged Ruth forward, her dress torn and muddy, her feet bleeding from running barefoot through the swamp. They threw her to the ground at Silas Beaumont's feet. She didn't make a sound as she hit the dirt, but her eyes were wide with terror. Silas circled her slowly, tapping his riding crop against his polished boot. His face, usually composed with cold indifference, now twisted with rage. "You think you can steal from me?" His voice was deadly quiet. "Your man is already dead. Shot him trying to cross the parish line." Ruth's shoulders shook with silent sobs. "Who helped you?" Silas demanded, suddenly shouting. "Nobody runs without help. Who gave you food? Who told you which way to go?" Ruth kept her eyes on the ground. "Nobody, master." We just ran." Silas backhanded her across the face. The sound cracked through the yard like a whip. Martha flinched beside Samson, her fingers digging into his arm. "Liar!" Silas turned to address the gathered slaves. "Whoever helped these ungrateful creatures step forward now, and I'll show mercy. Otherwise, I'll find you myself, and there'll be no mercy then." No one moved. No one even breathed. Silas nodded to Hollis. "Search the quarters. Every last one." Hollis grinned, motioning for the other overseers to follow. They scattered toward the slave cabins. Samson felt Martha tense beside him. They had nothing to hide, but that never mattered when Beaumont wanted someone to punish. The slaves waited in the blistering heat for nearly an hour. Little Annie leaned heavily against Samson's leg, her small body wilting in the sun. Elias stood straight, trying to appear strong, but Samson could see the fear in his boy's eyes. Finally, Hollis returned, something clutched in his hand. He walked with the swagger of a man who'd found exactly what he was looking for. "Look what I found under the floorboards in Martha Grady's cabin, sir." Hollis held up a gourd, the kind used to carry water or food. "Still has food inside, dried meat and cornbread." Samson's heart stopped. There had been nothing under their floor. He knew every inch of that cabin. Martha stepped forward. "That ain't ours, master. Someone put that there." "We didn't—" "Silence!" Silas roared. He turned to Samson, his eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. "Your woman's been stealing my food, hiding it for runaways." He looked Samson up and down with disgust. "Though looking at the size of you, I'm surprised you let her give away anything." Laughter rippled through the overseers. Samson kept his face blank, though inside his thoughts raced. The gourd wasn't theirs. Hollis had put it there, planted evidence to please his master. "Please, sir," Martha pleaded. "My children had nothing to do with this." Silas ignored her, pacing in front of them, considering his options. His eyes lit up with sudden inspiration. "I think it's time you learned what happens when you steal from me." He pointed at Martha and the children. "These 3 will receive 20 lashes each at dawn tomorrow. Public whipping, for all to see." He stepped closer to Samson, his face inches away. "Maybe watching your family bleed will teach that thick skull of yours something about loyalty." Samson's hands curled into fists at his sides. He felt Elias trembling beside him, heard Annie's soft whimper. "And you," Silas continued, pointing at Samson. "You'll dig their graves." He smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Behind the smokehouse. 3 holes, big enough for each of them. Might as well make use of those big arms for something useful." "Sir," Samson said, the word catching in his throat. "Please, get to digging." Silas cut him off. "I want those holes ready by sunset, just in case your wife and brats don't survive tomorrow's lesson." Hollis handed Samson a shovel, smirking. "Better dig deep, Oxman. Especially for that fat boy of yours." Samson was led to a patch of ground behind the smokehouse. The soil there was hard-packed and baked by the sun. He drove the shovel into the earth, every muscle in his body straining against the urge to turn and use it against the men who threatened his family. The afternoon crawled by as Samson dug. The overseers took turns watching him, laughing and placing bets on whether he would finish in time. Sweat soaked his clothes and his hands blistered, then bled. Still, he dug. 1 hole, 2, starting the 3rd. Around mid-afternoon, he sensed someone approach and looked up to see Elias standing at the edge of the clearing, a water dipper in his hand. "They said I could bring you water," the boy said quietly, glancing at the overseer who had dozed off in the shade. Samson took the dipper, drinking deeply. "Thank you, son." Elias looked at the graves, his young face solemn. "Let me help you, Pa." "No." Samson handed the dipper back. "Listen to me, Elias. Tomorrow, if you hear screaming, you run. You hear me? You get Annie, and you run for the swamp." "I won't leave you and Ma," Elias whispered fiercely. "You'll do as I say," Samson insisted. "Now go, before they see you talking to me." The boy retreated reluctantly. Samson returned to his grim work, each shovel full of dirt feeling heavier than the last. As the sun began to set, painting the sky blood red, Samson stood in the largest of the 3 holes, digging deeper. He heard footsteps and looked up to see Silas Beaumont watching him, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "Well now," Silas drawled, "ain't this a fitting sight?" The big ox, digging holes for his own family. Samson gripped the shovel handle tighter, feeling the wood creak under his fingers. He said nothing. "Your boy looks strong," Silas continued, sipping his drink. "Might fetch a good price after I sell him off. That is, if he survives tomorrow." The shovel trembled in Samson's hands. Just one swing, one quick movement, and Silas Beaumont's head would crack open like a rotten melon. The thought burned in Samson's mind, so vivid he could almost hear the sound it would make. Silas seemed to read his thoughts. He smiled coldly. "Go ahead. Give me a reason." Samson lowered his eyes, his grip on the shovel loosening slightly. Not yet. Not while his family still needed him. "That's what I thought," Silas sneered. He spat, the glob of saliva landing at Samson's feet. "Finish up. Dawn comes early." He turned and walked away, his figure black against the crimson sky. Samson climbed out of the grave and stood between the 3 holes he had dug, the red light of sunset reflected in the pools of his own sweat and blood at the bottom of each pit. As darkness fell, he stared at the graves meant for Martha, Elias, and little Annie, feeling something hard and sharp forming inside him, something that had been growing for years but now had an edge like broken glass. Gray light bled through the cypress trees, not yet dawn, but no longer night. Samson stood by the 3 graves he'd dug, his hands raw and blistered, dirt caked under his fingernails. He hadn't slept. How could he, knowing what was coming? Slaves gathered in a wide circle, forced to witness the punishment. Their faces were blank masks hiding fear and anger. No one looked at Samson directly. No one wanted to see the pain in his eyes. The shovel leaned against a tree nearby. Samson had been told to bring it, to fill the graves afterward, if needed. His muscles ached from yesterday's digging, but that pain was nothing compared to the burning in his chest. The crowd parted as Silas Beaumont approached, flanked by Hollis and another overseer. They dragged Martha and the children forward. Martha's face was calm, but her eyes found Samson's, speaking volumes without a word. Elias struggled against Hollis's grip, his young face tight with fury. Little Annie, too small to understand everything happening, simply cried. "Bring them up," Silas ordered, pointing to the 3 wooden posts that had been driven into the ground overnight. The overseers pushed Martha against the center post first, tying her arms above her head. Her dress was torn at the back, exposing her skin to the coming lash. "Ma!" Elias shouted as they grabbed him next. "Be still, child," Martha said softly. "The Lord sees us." Samson's hands trembled as they tied his son to the second post. The boy was too small for it, his feet barely touching the ground. Annie was last, her tiny frame looking impossibly fragile against the rough wood. Hollis uncoiled his whip, the leather making a slithering sound against the dirt. "Which one first, Mr. Beaumont?" Silas surveyed the scene, like a man choosing which dish to sample at dinner. "The girl, I think. Let Mama and brother see what's coming." Samson took a step forward. Several overseers tensed, hands moving to their guns. "Please," Samson said, the words scraping his throat. "She's just a child. She's been sick. She won't survive 20 lashes." Silas turned to him, smiling. "Then you better start digging again after we're done." He nodded to Hollis. "Proceed." Hollis lifted the whip, taking his stance behind Annie. The little girl's shoulders shook with sobs. "Papa," she cried. "Papa, help me." Something shifted in Samson's chest. A lifetime of swallowed rage, of biting his tongue, of looking down when they mocked him, of pretending not to hear when they called him ox, hog, fat, useless. All of it coalesced into a single burning point. Silas stepped closer to Samson, his eyes glittering with cruel pleasure. "What's the matter, boy? Let's see if that fat belly can move fast enough to save them." He laughed, turning back toward the posts where Annie's cries grew more frantic. Samson moved. Years of chopping wood, lifting barrels, digging fields had built strength that no amount of mockery could diminish. He crossed the clearing in 3 long strides, snatched the shovel from where it leaned, and swung it in a wide arc. The flat of the blade connected with Silas Beaumont's head with a sickening crack. Bone gave way beneath metal. Silas crumpled without a sound, blood spreading beneath him like spilled wine. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Disbelief froze the scene like a painting. Then Hollis dropped the whip and charged, drawing his pistol. Samson pivoted, driving the sharp edge of the shovel blade into Hollis's chest. The overseer's eyes widened in shock as blood bubbled from his lips. He fired wildly as he fell, the bullet kicking up dirt near Samson's feet. The gunshot broke the spell. Chaos erupted across the clearing. Overseers shouted, drawing weapons. Slaves scattered, some running for cover, others rushing forward to help. More gunfire cracked through the dawn air. Samson dropped the bloody shovel and ran to the posts, tearing at the ropes binding his family. "Martha, get Annie! Elias, run!" His hands were slick with blood. Whose, he couldn't tell, making the knots difficult to untie. Martha stumbled forward as the ropes gave way. "Samson, what have you done?" "No time." He freed Annie next, lifting her small body into Martha's arms. "Get to the swamp." "Now!" A bullet splintered the post where Elias was tied. Samson shielded his son with his body as he worked the ropes loose. Blood streamed down Samson's face from a graze at his temple. He hadn't even felt it happen. "Move!" he shouted as Elias came free. He pushed his family toward the tree line, where the cypress and tupelo would give them cover. They ran, ducking low, weaving between cabins and storage sheds. Behind them, men shouted orders. Dogs began to bark. Someone was ringing the plantation bell, its frantic clanging cutting through the morning mist. Elias stumbled over a root, falling hard. Samson scooped him up without breaking stride, tucking the boy under his arm like a sack of grain. "Pa, you're bleeding!" Elias cried, staring at the blood streaming down his father's face. "Don't matter," Samson gasped, pushing Martha ahead of him. "Keep going." They reached the edge of the swamp as the first rays of sun broke through the trees. Behind them, smoke rose from somewhere on the plantation. A shed or cabin caught fire in the chaos. The alarm bell rang louder, more urgent. Water splashed around their ankles, then their knees as they waded deeper into the swamp. Cypress knees rose like bony fingers from the murky water. Spanish moss hung in ghostly curtains, hiding them from view. Samson paused, setting Elias down on a half-submerged log. He turned back, just once, to look at the plantation that had been his prison for 40 years. Smoke billowed against the pink dawn sky. Men on horseback were already gathering, preparing to hunt them down. Martha clutched Annie to her chest, her eyes wide with fear and disbelief at what had just happened. Elias sat shivering, though the morning wasn't cold. "Samson," Martha whispered, "they'll kill us for sure now." Samson looked at the blood on his hands. Silas's blood. Hollis's blood. The rage that had exploded inside him was cooling now, leaving room for the first stirrings of fear. Not for himself, but for them. What had he done? Where could they go? He took Martha's free hand, squeezing it once. "We gone now," he whispered. The words half promise, half prayer. "We gone now, and we ain't comin' back." Black water sloshed around Samson's knees as he led his family deeper into the swamp. The morning sun couldn't penetrate the thick canopy of cypress and tupelo trees. Moss hung like dirty curtains, brushing their faces as they pushed forward. Every splash sounded too loud in Samson's ears. Martha carried Annie, trying to keep the child's small body above the murky water. The girl's forehead burned against her mother's neck. "She's getting hotter," Martha whispered. Samson touched his daughter's cheek. Annie's eyes were half closed, her breathing shallow. Fear gripped his heart tighter than any chains ever had. "We need to find dry ground," he said. Elias trudged beside them, eyes wide and watchful. Unlike his sister, the boy hadn't spoken since they'd fled. His gaze kept darting back toward the plantation, though it was long out of sight. Mosquitoes swarmed in thick clouds around their faces. Samson swatted them away from Annie, but they kept coming, drawn to their sweat and blood. His temple still bled where the bullet had grazed him, the wound mixing with sweat and dirt. "Can't go much further," Martha said, adjusting Annie in her arms. "The water's getting deeper." Samson nodded, scanning the swamp. Through a break in the trees, he spotted something solid, a raised piece of land with what looked like a small structure. He pointed. "There. Let's try that way." They angled toward the higher ground, moving carefully to avoid snakes and hidden cypress knees beneath the dark water. As they got closer, Samson could make out the shape of a small wooden shack, half hidden by vines and weather-worn. "Stay behind me," he whispered, approaching cautiously. The shack stood on stilts to keep it above flood level. Its roof sagged in the middle, and one wall had partially collapsed. But it was shelter, the first they'd seen since fleeing. Samson climbed the 3 rotting steps first, testing each one with his weight. The door hung loose on rusty hinges. He pushed it open, tensing for any movement inside. Empty. Just dirt, a broken chair, and cobwebs. But it was dry. "Come on up," he called softly. Martha carried Annie inside, laying her gently on the cleanest patch of floor. The girl moaned, but didn't open her eyes. "She needs water," Martha said, "and something to bring down her fever." Elias stood in the doorway, still looking behind them. "Are they coming?" Samson put a hand on his son's shoulder. "Not yet, but they will." In one corner of the shack, Samson found an old wooden barrel collecting rainwater from a hole in the roof. He dipped his fingers in. No mosquito larvae, and it smelled clean enough. "Martha, look!" He showed her the barrel. Water. Relief flickered across her exhausted face. She tore a strip from her already ragged dress and dipped it into the barrel, then placed the cool cloth on Annie's forehead. "There's a blanket, too," Samson said, pulling a worn woolen thing from beneath the broken chair. It smelled musty, but seemed clean enough. Must have been a hunting shack. Martha wrapped both children in the blanket, though Elias protested he wasn't cold. "Hush now," she told him. "Save your strength." Samson stood guard by the door, watching the swamp for any sign of movement. His body ached from the morning's violence, from the running, from years of labor that had preceded this desperate day. "What do we do now?" Martha asked quietly. Before Samson could answer, a soft splash came from outside. He tensed, reaching for a broken chair leg to use as a weapon. A lantern's glow appeared through the cypress trees, casting long shadows across the water. Someone was coming. "Get back," Samson whispered, positioning himself in the doorway. The figure approached slowly, an older black man with white hair and beard, moving with the confidence of someone who knew these waters well. He wore simple clothes and carried a walking stick in one hand, lantern in the other. "Evening, friends," the stranger called softly. "Don't be afraid. I'm not here to harm you." Samson didn't move. "Who are you?" "They call me Preacher Cain." The old man climbed the steps with surprising agility. "I heard there was trouble at Beaumont's place." His eyes took in Samson's blood-stained clothes, the huddled family behind him. "Word travels fast through these swamps." "We ain't going back," Samson said, gripping the chair leg tighter. Kane's weathered face softened. "I wouldn't expect you to. Not after what you did." He set his lantern down. "I'm part of a secret route. We help folks like you reach free soil." Martha moved forward. "The Underground Railroad? Some call it that." Kane nodded. "I call it God's work." Annie coughed weakly from her place on the floor. Kane glanced at her with concern. "Your little one's sick. I have herbs in my sack that might help." He reached slowly into his bag, bringing out a small cloth pouch. "Make a tea from these. It'll bring down fever." Martha took the pouch cautiously. "Why would you help us?" Samson asked, still suspicious. Kane met his gaze directly. "Because every soul deserves freedom, brother. And because you'll need help now more than ever." His voice grew grave. "Major Beaumont arrived this afternoon. Silas's brother. He's offering gold for your capture. Dead or alive." Samson's stomach tightened. "How many men?" "4 bounty hunters to start. More coming." Kane looked out at the darkening swamp. "They've got dogs." Elias pressed against Samson's side. "Pa, what'll we do?" Kane turned back to them. "You travel by night, hide by day. I know safe places, people who'll help. We head north, crossing the river when we can." "Why should we trust you?" Samson asked. "Because you have no choice," Kane said simply. "And because I've helped 37 souls find freedom before you. I aim to make it 41. Samson looked at Martha. She nodded slightly, her hand resting on Annie's forehead. "All right," Samson said finally. "We'll go with you." Night fell quickly in the swamp. Rain began to fall, drumming on the shack's roof. In the distance, thunder rumbled. "Good," Kane said. "The storm will cover our tracks." By full dark, they had gathered their meager supplies. Kane led them to a flat-bottomed skiff hidden in the reeds nearby. The small boat rocked as they climbed in. Martha with Annie in her arms, Elias pressed against her side, Samson at the rear with the pole. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating their faces for a brief, stark moment. Martha's lips moved in silent prayer. Kane sat near the front, humming a low hymn that somehow carried over the rainfall without seeming to make noise that might alert hunters. Samson pushed them forward, the pole finding purchase in the muddy swamp bottom. Each stroke took them further from the only life they'd known, deeper into unknown territory. Rain pelted their skin. Annie slept fitfully in Martha's arms, the herbal tea having eased her fever somewhat. Elias watched the water slide past, occasionally looking back as if expecting to see torches following them. "Keep to the deepest channels," Kane instructed quietly. "Dogs lose scent in water." Samson nodded, focusing on the rhythm of poling the skiff forward. His muscles burned, but he wouldn't stop. He couldn't. Every push of the pole was one step further from chains, from whips, from graves dug for his family. "Ain't no turning back now," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "Ain't no turning back now." 3 nights later, the moon hung half-hidden behind clouds, casting weak silver light over a landscape of destruction. The remains of a sugar mill rose like broken teeth against the sky. Blackened beams, collapsed walls, the great metal boilers rusted and split from the heat of whatever fire had consumed this place years ago. Samson helped Martha climb onto dry ground, her movements slow and stiff. Annie clung to her back, face gaunt from fever that had only recently broken. Elias stumbled beside them, eyes hollow with exhaustion. None of them had eaten properly since fleeing the plantation. Water and a handful of berries Kane had found weren't enough to sustain their strength. "Rest here," Kane whispered, leading them toward the shelter of a partially standing wall. "We're safe for a moment." Samson lowered himself onto a fallen beam, muscles trembling from the effort of pushing the skiff through endless swamp channels. His hands were raw from the pole, blood mixed with swamp water and blisters. "How much further?" Martha asked, settling Annie against her chest. Kane squinted at the sky. 3 days to the next safe house, if we keep this pace. Then, the river crossing. Elias slumped against the wall. I'm hungry, Pa. The words cut Samson deeper than any whip ever had. He'd promised to protect them, yet here they were, starving, exposed, hunted. I know, son, he said, his voice rough. We all are. Cain reached into his ragged coat and pulled out a small piece of paper, creased and yellowed with age. Come here, boy, he said to Elias. Let's use this time. Curious, Elias moved closer. Samson watched as Cain smoothed the paper against his knee. A torn page from a Bible. This here's an A, Cain said, pointing to a letter. First letter there is, and this here's an E. Elias leaned forward, eyes suddenly bright despite his hunger. Show me again. While Martha dozed with Annie, Cain taught Elias to recognize letters by firelight. The boy traced them in the ash with his finger, mouth moving silently as he practiced. Samson watched. Something tight squeezing in his chest. On the plantation, teaching a slave to read meant whipping. Here, in the ruins, his son was claiming what had been forbidden. He's quick, Cain said quietly to Samson. Mind like a trap. Always was, Samson replied, pride mixing with fear. Too smart for his own good sometimes. A rustling sound from beyond the ruins made them all freeze. Samson reached for a piece of charred wood, ready to fight. 3 men emerged from the darkness, thin, bearded, dressed in mismatched clothes. White men, but not the neat clothing of plantation owners or bounty hunters. Their faces were gaunt, eyes wary. Well now, the tallest one said, hands raised to show he held no weapon. Didn't expect company in our little camp. Cain stood slowly. We're just passing through. Mean no trouble. The man nodded. Reckon you're running. Don't worry, so are we. He gestured to his companions. Deserted from the army 3 months back. Name's Tucker. These are Rollins and Webb. You're deserters? Elias asked, eyes wide. Didn't see the point in dying for rich men's cotton, Tucker said with a shrug. Y'all look half-starved. We caught rabbits earlier. Got enough to share. Martha had woken, her arm tightening around Annie. Her eyes met Samson's, worry clear in them. That's mighty kind, Cain said carefully. Tucker grinned. Folks in trouble ought to help each other, I say. Come on, our fire's just beyond that wall. They followed cautiously. True to their word, the deserters had a small fire with 2 skinned rabbits cooking. The smell made Samson's empty stomach clench painfully. While they ate, Tucker talked easily about safe routes north and places to avoid. Martha remained silent, watching the men with cautious eyes. When Tucker offered them blankets for the night, she finally spoke. Thank you for your kindness, she said softly, not meeting his gaze. Later, as the others slept, Samson kept watch, unable to relax despite his exhaustion. Something about Tucker's friendliness bothered him. The man had asked too many questions about where they'd come from. The moon had shifted when Samson heard voices from the other side of the wall. Tucker and his friends speaking in low tones. He moved silently closer to listen. $50 each for the adults, maybe 30 for the boy, Tucker was saying. The girl looks sickly, but they might give 20 for her too. When do we make our move? Rollins asked. Dawn, Tucker replied. They'll be sleeping deepest then. Tie 'em up quick. Be in Baton Rouge by tomorrow night. Bounty notice said the big one killed his master, Webb whispered. Better be careful with him. That's why we hit him first, Tucker said. While he's asleep? Samson backed away silently, cold anger replacing the fear in his veins. He found a heavy piece of timber in the ruins, testing its weight in his hands. He waited in shadow until Tucker separated from the others to relieve himself. Moving with a quickness that belied his size, Samson swung the log with all his strength. It connected with Tucker's skull with a sickening crack. The man dropped without a sound, dead before he hit the ground. Samson stood over the body, breathing hard, when he felt a presence behind him. Cain stood there, moonlight catching his weathered face. I heard them too, the preacher said quietly. looking down at the dead man. "They were going to sell us," Samson said, still gripping the bloodied timber. Cain nodded. "What about the other two? They'll run when they find him. Or I'll kill them too." Cain's eyes were sad as he studied Samson's face. "Every man you kill, freedom runs farther away from your soul, brother." Samson looked at his hands, sticky with blood that appeared black in the moonlight. "Freedom don't care who dies to reach it," he answered. "And neither do I anymore." They buried Tucker's body in the ashes of the mill, digging a shallow grave with broken boards. Rain began to fall as they finished, droplets hissing as they hit the remains of the fire. The other deserters had indeed fled, taking most of their supplies, but leaving 2 blankets behind in their haste. As the others slept beneath the meager shelter, wrapped in the stolen blankets, Samson sat awake. He stared at his hands in the dying firelight, watching as rain slowly washed the blood away. Each streak of red disappeared into the earth, joining the blood of countless others who had died in this land. In the distance, thunder rolled across the sky like the wheels of a Judgment Day carriage. Samson didn't flinch. He had crossed a line tonight. One more sin added to his tally. But he would add 1,000 more if that's what it took to see his family free. The rain fell harder. Samson remained still, a dark sentinel keeping watch as the night deepened around them. Morning broke with startling beauty after the storm. The sky had cleared to a perfect blue, and sunlight sparkled on wet leaves. The smell of rain-washed earth replaced the usual swamp stench of rot and mud. Samson woke before the others, his body stiff from sitting upright all night. He flexed his fingers, examining the cracks and cuts that marked his palms. The blood was gone, but the memory remained. Elias stirred first, rubbing his eyes. "Morning, Pa." "Morning, son," Samson replied, his voice low. "Sleep good?" The boy nodded, glancing around. "Where'd those men go?" "They had their own path to follow," Samson said carefully. "We got ours." Cain emerged from beneath the shelter, stretching his thin frame. He met Samson's gaze, but said nothing about the night before. "Today we make good time," Cain announced as Martha and Annie woke. "Rain washed away our tracks. Air's clear enough to travel by day for once." They ate the last of the rabbits cold, saving time. As they prepared to leave, Cain pulled a folded scrap of oilcloth from his coat, a crude map marked with charcoal lines. "We followed the creek north," he said, tracing the path with his finger. "By sunset, we reach Lila's camp. There's food there, and rest." "Who's Lila?" Annie asked, her voice thin but stronger than it had been in days. Cain smiled. "A friend to tired travelers like us. She keeps a safe place by the big river." They moved quickly that day. The storm had cleared paths through the undergrowth and filled the creeks, making it easier to follow waterways. Even Annie walked for stretches, though Samson carried her when she tired. By mid-afternoon, the landscape began to change. The thick cypress swamps gave way to higher ground, with stands of oak and hickory. Birds called more freely here, and once they spotted deer watching them from a distance. "Not far now," Cain said as the sun lowered. "Listen for the river." Soon they heard it, the deep, constant murmur of the Mississippi. The sound grew louder as they climbed a gentle rise. At the top, they paused, staring at the vast expanse of water stretching before them, glowing orange in the sunset. "Lord have mercy," Martha whispered. "That's the river to freedom," Elias said, eyes wide. Cain nodded. "Once across, we're in free territory. But we ain't there yet. Come on. Lila's camp is just below." They descended toward a cluster of small cabins nestled in a protected hollow near the riverbank. Smoke rose from stone chimneys, and the smell of cooking food drifted up to meet them. A woman stepped from the largest cabin, tall and straight-backed despite her gray hair, wearing a clean blue dress with an apron. She raised her hand in greeting. "Cain, you old sinner," she called, her voice warm and strong. "Bringing me more strays, I see." "Evening, Leela," Cain answered with a smile. "These folks have come a hard road." Lila's eyes moved over each of them, lingering on Annie's thin face. "I can see that." "Well, come on then. Standing there won't fill your bellies." The camp was larger than it first appeared. 5 cabins arranged in a half-circle, partially hidden by trees and brush. 2 other families were already there, resting before their own journeys north. Lila led them to a small cabin at the edge of the camp. "You can wash up here," she said, showing them inside. A large wooden tub sat in the corner. "I'll send hot water and clean clothes." When the door closed, Martha sank onto the single bed and pulled Annie into her lap. "We made it this far," she whispered, stroking her daughter's hair. Young women from the camp brought buckets of steaming water. They filled the tub and left soap and rags for washing, along with simple but clean clothes. Martha bathed Annie first, then Elias. When it was her turn, she hesitated, then sank into the water with a soft sigh. Samson watched as she unwound her hair and washed away weeks of grime and fear. As Martha combed through Annie's clean hair with borrowed comb, tears began to slide down her cheeks. She worked silently, her hands gentle as they untangled knots. "What's wrong, Mama?" Annie asked, turning to see her mother's tears. Martha shook her head, smiling through her crying. "Nothing's wrong, baby. Just remembering how it feels to be treated like people again." When they were all clean and dressed in the borrowed clothes, Lila called them to dinner. In the main cabin, a long table was laid with bowls of rich stew and plates of golden cornbread. The smell alone made Samson's stomach clench with hunger. They ate until they could eat no more. Color returned to Annie's face as she soaked cornbread in broth. Elias talked eagerly with the other children at the table. Martha sat straighter than Samson had seen in years. After dinner, Cain and Lila explained what lay ahead. "Tomorrow night, a boatman will take you across," Lila said, spreading a map on the table. "On the other side, another guide waits to move you north." "How much further to real freedom?" Samson asked. 3 weeks, maybe 4, Cain answered. "But once across that water, you're in free territory. No slave catchers can legally take you." "Legally don't mean much when they got guns," Lila added sharply. "But you'll have friends along the way." Later, as darkness fell, they gathered around a fire outside with the other families. For the first time since their escape, there was talking, and even quiet laughter. Someone produced a wooden flute, and soft music filled the air. Samson sat slightly apart, watching Martha speak with another woman. Annie had fallen asleep on her lap, and Elias was learning a string game from an older boy. "You did right by them," Cain said, sitting beside him. "Getting them this far." Samson nodded, his eyes on Martha. "I promised her a home once, back when we were young." "You'll have that chance again," Cain said. "If we make it," Samson replied. He looked at his family, clean and fed and almost peaceful. "I'll give them a place where no man can sell our children. That's my promise now." "You will," Cain said simply. As the night deepened, the music grew softer. The moon rose, casting silver light across the river's surface. The water moved in gentle ripples, each one catching the light like a promise. Here and gone, here and gone, but always returning. Martha came to sit beside Samson, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Look at them," she whispered. Annie slept peacefully nearby. Elias sat with the other children, laughing at something one had said. Samson's face softened. For the first time in weeks, perhaps years, the faintest smile touched his lips. He put his arm around Martha's shoulders and watched the moonlight dance across the river that would carry them to freedom. The night had been peaceful, their second at Lila's camp. The river gurgled steadily beyond the trees, and most slept deeply, bellies full and bodies rested for the first time in weeks. Even Samson had allowed himself to drift off. Martha's breathing steady beside him, the children curled together under a borrowed quilt. A distant sound pierced his dreams first, the faint, unmistakable baying of hounds. Samson stirred but didn't fully wake until he felt a hand gripping his shoulder, shaking him urgently. "Samson, wake up." Cain's voice was barely a whisper, but alarm sharpened each syllable. Samson's eyes snapped open. The cabin was still dark, no hint of dawn yet visible through the small window. Cain's face loomed above him, eyes wide with fear. "They found us," Cain whispered. For one heartbeat, Samson didn't move. Then he was up, shaking Martha awake, reaching for the children. "How many?" Samson asked, voice low as he pulled on his boots. "Too many," Cain answered, peering through a crack in the door. "Dogs, horses, men with guns." Martha was already gathering Annie, who blinked in sleepy confusion. Elias sat up straight, instantly alert. "The boat?" Samson asked. Cain shook his head. "Won't be here till sunset." "We need to run now." Outside, the dogs' barking grew louder. Orders were shouted, men's voices carrying through the pre-dawn stillness. Lila appeared at their door, her gray hair loose around her shoulders. "Back way," she hissed. "Through the trees. I'll hold them off." "They'll kill you," Martha protested. Lila's face hardened. Wouldn't be the first time they tried. Samson gathered their few belongings, the knife he'd taken from the deserters, a small bundle of food, the map Cain had shown them. They slipped out the back of the cabin, keeping low. Other families were doing the same, shadows moving between the trees toward the riverbank. They made it halfway to the tree line when the first shot cracked through the darkness. "There! By the cabins!" a man's voice shouted. More shots followed. A lantern shattered against a cabin wall, and flames leaped up the dry wood. Screams erupted as people scattered in all directions. "Run!" Samson pushed Martha ahead of him. "Get to the river!" They sprinted for the trees, but men on horseback were circling around, cutting them off. Samson saw a tall figure directing the others, a lean man in a dark coat, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "That's Pike," Cain muttered. "The bounty hunter." "Take them alive!" Pike's voice carried across the chaos. "Beaumont wants the big one breathing." 3 hunters closed in from the side. Samson pushed the children behind him, grabbing a fallen branch as a weapon. One raised his gun. Cain moved with shocking speed for an old man. He lunged forward, knocking Elias and Annie flat just as the shot rang out. The bullet caught him in the back. He stumbled, but stayed upright, shielding the children with his body. "Go," he gasped to Samson. "Get them safe." A hunter rushed Samson, rifle raised like a club. Samson swung the branch, catching the man across the face. The hunter dropped, but another was already there. They grappled, falling to the ground. Samson's greater weight gave him advantage. He slammed the man's head against a tree root, feeling something give beneath his hands. When he looked up, more hunters had surrounded them. Martha was screaming, being dragged toward a wagon. Elias fought like a wildcat against 2 men holding him. Annie cried, clutching at her mother. Cain had collapsed to his knees, blood soaking through his shirt. His eyes found Samson's across the trampled ground. "Don't lose yourself getting free," Cain wheezed, blood bubbling at his lips. "Remember what you're fighting for." A shot cracked, and Samson felt fire tear through his shoulder. He staggered, but stayed on his feet, turning to face Pike, who approached with a smoking pistol. "You're worth more than all these others combined," Pike said coolly. "Master Beaumont's mighty eager to make an example of you." Samson charged him with a roar. Another shot rang out. Pain exploded in Samson's side, but momentum carried him forward. He collided with Pike, sending them both sprawling. Pike recovered faster, kicking Samson in the wound. White-hot agony blinded Samson. Through the haze, he heard Pike calling orders. "Load them in the wagons. We head south at dawn." Martha's voice cut through his pain. "Samson! Samson!" He forced his eyes open to see her being shoved into a covered wagon, the children already inside. Elias's face appeared at the canvas opening, eyes wide with terror. "Pa!" he screamed. Samson tried to rise, but hands grabbed him, dragging him toward another wagon. Blood soaked his shirt, pouring from his shoulder and side. The camp was fully ablaze now, flames leaping into the night sky. Somewhere, Lila was shouting defiance as they took her. With one desperate surge of strength, Samson broke free. He staggered toward the river, hearing shouts behind him. "Stop him!" Bullets kicked up dirt around his feet. The river gleamed before him, black and swift in the firelight. Samson heard wagon wheels beginning to turn, taking his family away. He reached the bank and dove. The cold water shocked his system. Current grabbed him immediately, pulling him away from the burning camp. Bullets splashed around him. He stayed under as long as his lungs would allow, letting the river carry him downstream. When he surfaced, gasping, the camp was already distant, marked only by the orange glow of flames against the night sky. His wounds burned like hot iron pressed to his flesh. Each stroke was agony, but he forced himself to swim, angling toward the far shore, toward free territory. Dawn found him clinging to a fallen tree lodged against the opposite bank. His body felt leaden, drained of strength. Blood still seeped from his wounds, turning the water around him pink. With trembling hands, Samson tore strips from his shirt, packing his wounds with river moss, as Martha had once taught him. The moss would slow the bleeding, clean the wounds. He worked methodically, forcing himself to think only of survival. The eastern sky lightened slowly, revealing his surroundings. The river stretched wide before him, separating him from the southern shore, where smoke still rose from what remained of Lila's camp, from where they had taken his family. Samson pulled himself fully onto the bank, collapsing in the mud. He was across, on free soil. But freedom meant nothing without Martha and the children. "I'm coming for you," he whispered, his voice raw. "I'm coming." 2 days had passed since the raid. Samson moved through the back roads like a ghost, following the deep wagon ruts south. His wounds throbbed with each step, but the moss had stemmed the bleeding. The bullet in his shoulder remained, a constant reminder burning beneath his skin. The side wound had been cleaner, a graze that tore flesh but passed through. He'd found a discarded shirt hanging on a fence, too small, but better than his blood-crusted rags. His once heavy frame had shrunk during their journey, muscle remaining but fat, melting away from weeks of hard travel and little food. The oversized slave who'd been mocked as the fat ox was gone, replaced by something leaner, harder. By day, Samson dug for wild onions and chewed on bitter roots that dulled his hunger. When rain fell, he caught water in cupped hands, drinking deeply. At night, he crept between farms, sometimes sleeping beneath wagons left in yards, listening to white families talk through open windows. "You hear about that slave killed his master?" A man's voice drifted from a porch, where 2 farmers smoked pipes. "Big fellow, they say. Killed 2 white men with a shovel." "Heard they caught his family," the second man answered, "bringing 'em back for hanging." Samson clenched his fists in the darkness, but remained silent. He'd learned long ago that stillness was survival. Near dusk on the second day, he found himself outside a roadside tavern where Confederate soldiers watered their horses. Samson crouched behind rain barrels, eavesdropping. "Major Beaumont's mad as hell," a young soldier was saying. "Wants that big slave alive for the hanging. Gonna string up the wife and kids in front of him, then take him apart slow." "When's it happening?" another asked. "Dawn, 3 days from now. Henderson Plantation. The major's making a show of it, invited half the county to watch. Says it'll be a lesson for any slave thinking of running." Samson's blood went cold. 3 days. He had 3 days to reach them. The soldiers mounted and rode off, but Samson remained motionless until full dark. Henderson Plantation. He knew it. 15 miles south, a massive estate that backed onto Beaumont land. The major had been Silas's older brother, even crueler by reputation. Through the night, Samson followed the main wagon trail, staying in the trees alongside the road. Near morning, he found confirmation. Fragments of a child's corn husk doll Annie had been carrying trampled into the mud. He lifted it gently, tucking the broken pieces into his pocket. Dawn found him hiding in a drainage ditch as farm workers began their day. He watched their movements, learning their patterns. When a wagon loaded with fence posts rumbled past, Samson emerged from hiding. "Need a hand?" he called to the driver, keeping his head lowered, his voice steady despite his racing heart. The white man squinted at him. "You belong to Henderson?" "Just hired for fence mending," Samson lied smoothly. "Master Baker sent me over to help with the new pasture line." The man shrugged. "Could use the help unloading." "Hop on." Samson climbed onto the wagon, careful not to wince as his wound stretched. They passed through gates topped with iron spikes, then rattled up a long drive toward a grand white house. Behind it stood barns, slave quarters, and outbuildings. Guards with rifles patrolled the grounds. "What's all the extra security for?" Samson asked casually as they unloaded posts. "Big execution coming," the driver answered. "Caught some runaways. One of them killed old Silas Beaumont over at the next property." "Major's making an example. Where are they keeping them?" Samson asked, stacking posts methodically. The driver pointed. "Woman's in the kitchen. They're working her till the hanging. Kids are locked in the tobacco barn. The big slave ain't been caught yet, but they'll get him." Through the morning, Samson hauled posts and helped dig fence holes. When noon came, he volunteered to carry water to the kitchen. "Need to haul this to the cook," he told a guard, lifting a heavy bucket. The guard barely glanced at him. "Make it quick." Inside the kitchen, steam filled the air as women prepared the midday meal. And there, standing at a massive pot, stirring with mechanical movements, was Martha. Her face was gaunt, her movements stiff. A bruise darkened her cheek. Their eyes met across the room. For one heartbeat, her spoon faltered. Then, with practiced composure, she looked away. Giving no sign she recognized him. Samson set the water bucket down. "Cook says you need more water for washing," he said loudly. "Set it there," Martha answered, her voice flat. As he placed the bucket beside her, their fingers brushed. She pressed something into his palm. A small key. "Barn lock," she whispered, so softly he barely caught the words. Samson nodded imperceptibly and left, the key burning in his pocket. When evening came, he volunteered to feed the horses. No one questioned him. Just another black face doing menial labor. After darkness fell, he slipped from the stables and made his way to the tobacco barn. The lock yielded to the key. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of dried leaves. Samson whispered, "Elias? Annie?" A rustling came from the corner. Elias emerged from shadow. Annie clutched tightly to his side. The boy's face was bruised, one eye swollen nearly shut. "Pa?" he whispered in disbelief. Samson gathered them both into his arms, feeling Annie's fever-hot skin against his neck. She whimpered softly, but made no real sound. "What happened to her?" Samson asked, examining his daughter's vacant stare. "She stopped talking after they took us," Elias whispered. "They hit her when she cried for Ma." Rage flooded Samson's veins, but he pushed it down. "Listen to me," he said urgently. "I'm going to get you out. All of you. But I need time to plan. 3 more days, that's what we have." "They're going to hang us," Elias said, his voice eerily calm. "At dawn. They keep telling us, so we'll be scared." "No," Samson said firmly. "That ain't happening. I promise you." He explained what little plan he had, that he would remain as a laborer, watching the guards' routines, finding weaknesses. The night before the execution, he would free them all. "Be ready," he told Elias. "Keep your sister warm. Pretend to be broken so they don't watch you close." Footsteps approached outside. Samson kissed them both quickly. "I'll be back," he promised, slipping out and relocking the door just as a guard rounded the corner. Later, hidden behind the stables, Samson examined his stolen treasures: a kitchen knife he'd taken while delivering water, and an old rifle with 6 bullets he'd found forgotten in a tool shed. By firelight, he sharpened the knife against a stone, testing its edge with his thumb. Around him, fireflies rose from the grass, their lights blinking in the darkness like tiny stars. Samson loaded the rifle methodically, each movement precise despite his shaking hands. "This time," he murmured, watching the main house where Martha worked, "nobody leaves alive." A cold blue light crept along the eastern horizon as execution day dawned. Slaves from Henderson Plantation and neighboring farms had been gathered in the main yard, forced to stand in silent rows facing the newly built gallows. 3 nooses hung against the gray sky, swaying slightly in the morning breeze. Torches flickered around the yard, their flames burning low as night surrendered to morning. Guards with rifles stood at attention, faces hard in the dim light. Martha and the children had been brought out earlier, their hands bound behind them. Martha stood tall despite the bruises darkening her face, while Elias kept his body protectively near Annie. The little girl's eyes remained vacant, locked somewhere far away from this terrible place. Major Beaumont emerged from the main house, resplendent in his Confederate uniform. Unlike his brother Silas, who had been all crude anger, the major carried himself with cold precision. His gray hair was neatly combed, his beard trimmed to perfection. He walked to the gallows steps and turned to address the assembled witnesses. "Today, we restore order," he announced, his voice carrying across the yard. "My brother was murdered by the slave who once belonged to him, a creature who bit the hand that fed him. This is the price of such ingratitude." He gestured toward Martha and the children. "These accomplices will hang first, as the law demands, and when we capture the murderer himself, he will watch as we burn every piece of him, slowly, so all will remember that some sins cannot be forgiven." A murmur passed through the crowd of white landowners who had come to witness the execution. Beaumont raised his hand for silence, continuing his speech about justice and order. No one noticed the dark figure moving along the stable rooftop, rifle in hand. Samson steadied himself against the chimney. 3 days of watching guard rotations had taught him their patterns. 3 days of hiding, gathering weapons, and waiting for this moment. His hands were steady as he raised the rifle, sighting down its barrel at Major Beaumont's chest. He squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the dawn silence. Beaumont's shoulder erupted in blood as he staggered backward, his speech cut short. Confusion erupted across the yard as guards shouted, searching for the shooter. Samson fired again, dropping a guard near Martha. Then he swung down from the roof using a rope he'd secured the night before, landing hard but staying on his feet. The crowd scattered as he charged forward, knife in one hand, rifle in the other. "Run!" he shouted to the assembled slaves, many of whom broke for the gates. 2 guards rushed him. Samson fired point-blank into the first man's chest, then swung the empty rifle like a club, catching the second across the face. He reached Martha in 3 long strides, cutting her bonds with the kitchen knife. "Get the children," he gasped, pressing the knife into her hands. Martha moved with desperate speed, slashing Elias and Annie free. Blood streaked her dress where a guard's bullet had grazed her arm, but her movements showed no pain, only purpose. Elias snatched a fallen pistol from the ground, standing over Annie with determined eyes. The boy who'd left Beaumont Plantation weeks ago was gone. This Elias held the gun with steady hands, firing once when a guard rushed them. The man fell clutching his leg. "Other captives," Martha said, pointing toward 3 more runaways bound near the slave quarters. Samson nodded, reloading the rifle with bullets from his pocket. They moved as a unit, Martha cutting bonds, Elias guarding their rear, Samson clearing their path. Annie stumbled between them, silent but moving. The yard had become chaos. Freed slaves attacked guards. Fires spread from knocked-over torches. White spectators fled toward their carriages as black smoke billowed skyward. "There's horses by the south gate," Samson told Martha. "Get everyone there." Martha gathered the freed captives, leading them through the mayhem. Elias helped Annie along, the pistol still gripped in his free hand. Samson provided covering fire, each shot finding its mark with terrible precision. He was reloading again when a shadow fell across him. Samson looked up to find Deputy Harlan Pike standing 10 feet away, revolver drawn and pointed at his chest. For a long second, they locked eyes, hunter and hunted, frozen in the moment. Pike's face showed conflict, his finger tight on the trigger. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead. "You know what I should do," Pike said quietly. "I know what you will do," Samson answered, not raising his weapon. The deputy's jaw tightened. Something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps. Samson remembered the rumors about Pike, that his own mother had been enslaved, that Pike himself carried mixed blood beneath his badge, and certainty. Pike lowered his gun slightly. "Go," he said softly, almost inaudibly beneath the chaos around them. "Before I remember, I'm the law." Samson nodded once, backing away slowly. Pike turned and fired his revolver into the air 3 times, shouting, "They're heading south! After them!" The ruse might have worked, but another guard saw the deception. The man raised his rifle, aiming not at Samson, but at Pike's back. The shot rang out, catching the deputy between his shoulder blades. Pike fell forward onto his knees, his face showing brief surprise before he pitched forward into the dirt. Samson hesitated only a moment before running toward the south gate, where Martha waited with the children and 4 stolen horses. "We have to ride now," Samson told them, lifting Annie onto a horse with Martha. "North through the forest. Don't stop till dark." Behind them, Henderson Plantation was transformed. Flames leapt from the main house to the outbuildings. Black smoke billowed into the morning sky, visible for miles. The crackle of burning wood mixed with shouts and sporadic gunfire as they rode away. Elias looked back once. "Is that man, the deputy, he let you go?" "He chose," Samson said simply. "Sometimes a man gets one chance to pick what side he's on." They entered the forest at a gallop, the rising sun at their backs. The fire grew distant, but still lit their path through the trees. Ahead lay swamps and rivers, danger and hope. Freedom remained miles away, across state lines and through hostile territory. But they rode together, 4 souls moving as one toward the North Star. The winter wind cut like knives through their tattered clothes. December had come to the Ohio Valley, bringing with it an early frost that coated the ground each morning and melted into mud by noon. Samson led his family along narrow back roads, avoiding towns and patrols, moving only when safety allowed. Martha's face had grown gaunt over the weeks since their escape. Once, soft cheeks now showed sharp angles, her eyes sunk deeper, but burned with the same fierce determination. Elias had grown taller somehow, stretching up like a sapling seeking light. Only Annie seemed smaller, curled inward against the cold. "Not much farther," Samson promised, as they trudged through a stand of bare trees. They survived on whatever they could find or steal. Wild roots dug from frozen ground, corn left in harvested fields, occasional scraps from sympathetic farmers who asked no questions but left food where wanderers might find it. At night, they huddled in barns or caves, Martha holding the children close while Samson kept watch. Their clothes hung in tatters. Samson's shirt, once stretched tight across his broad chest, now hung loose from shoulders that had grown lean from hunger and constant movement. His beard was longer, streaked with gray that hadn't been there before. The weight of their journey marked each of them in visible ways. "There's the signal," Elias whispered, pointing to a lantern hanging in a distant farmhouse window. 3 quick flashes, then darkness, then 2 more. Samson nodded. "That's our people." The family made their way toward the light, keeping to the shadows of trees that lined the property. A figure emerged from the barn, moving carefully toward them, a white man with spectacles and a thick beard. "Friend of a friend," the man said quietly. "Call me Daniel. You must be the family from Louisiana." Samson nodded once, still wary. "The river's half a mile east," Daniel explained. "We've got a boat waiting, but we need to move before the moon rises too high." He handed them each a bundle. "Warmer clothes, and there's bread and dried meat inside." Martha touched the man's arm gently. "Thank you," she whispered, the first words she'd spoken to a white man without fear in her voice. They followed Daniel through sleeping fields, eating as they walked. The bread was dense and still warm, the best thing they'd tasted in weeks. Annie actually smiled as she chewed, a sight so rare it made Samson's throat tighten. When they reached the riverbank, 2 black men waited with a flat-bottomed boat partially hidden among reeds. They nodded at Daniel, then turned their eyes to Samson's family. "Ohio's right across," one man said. "Free soil. But this crossing can be tricky. Water's running high and cold." Samson gazed across the dark expanse. The Ohio River stretched wide before them, ice forming along its edges. Beyond it lay freedom. Not just temporary escape, but legal freedom. State law would protect them there. No more running. "We ready?" he said simply. They boarded the small craft, settling low as instructed. The boatmen used long poles to push away from shore, working silently with the practice of men who had made this crossing many times before. Mist hung over the water, providing cover as they slipped into the current. Annie clung to Martha, shivering not just from cold, but from memory. The last time they'd crossed water, they'd lost Preacher Cain, lost their first taste of freedom. Elias kept one hand on the boat's edge, his eyes fixed on the northern shore as if willing it closer. "Stay still now," one boatman warned as they reached midstream where the current pulled strongest. "We're in Kentucky waters still." The crossing seemed to take hours, though it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. Every splash sounded too loud, every creak of the boat a betrayal. But no shouts came from either shore, no lanterns appeared along the banks. Finally, the boat scraped against mud and stone. The northern bank. Ohio. "Step careful now," Daniel whispered as they disembarked. "Ground's slippery." Samson lifted Annie, then helped Martha onto shore. When his own feet touched the mud of the northern bank, something shifted inside him. Not celebration, not yet, but a releasing of breath he'd been holding for weeks. Maybe years. "We got a safe house 2 miles inland," one of the boatmen explained. "Colored family runs it. You'll rest there before moving on to Canada." They walked through dark woods, following barely visible paths. An hour later, they arrived at a small farmhouse set back from the road. Warm light glowed from its windows. An older black woman opened the door before they knocked. "Come in quick," she said. "I'm Sarah." Inside, a fire burned in the hearth. The woman gave them blankets and bowls of hot stew, then cleaned and dressed their wounds. Samson's still healing gunshot, Martha's scraped arms, the children's blistered feet. "You safe here," Sarah told them. "This house hasn't lost a soul yet." Later, as the children slept on pallets near the fire, Samson slipped outside. He walked to a small stream that ran behind the property, feeding eventually into the Ohio. In the water's dark surface, moonlight revealed his reflection. A stranger stared back at him. The man in the water was thinner, harder, marked by scars visible and invisible. His face had hollowed, cheekbones standing sharp beneath skin pulled tight. Even his eyes seemed different, deeper set, watching the world from some new distance. Footsteps crunched softly behind him. Martha appeared at his side, her own reflection joining his in the water. "We free now," she said quietly, slipping her hand into his. Samson nodded slowly. "Free costs heavy." Martha leaned against him, both of them watching the water flow past. "Worth the price," she whispered. Night settled fully over the camp. Through the window, Samson could see Elias and Annie sleeping peacefully for the first time in months. No nightmares, no startling at sounds, their bodies finally releasing the constant tension of flight. Samson sat on a fallen log, watching the moon's reflection ripple across the dark water. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, learning to live as free people, finding work, building something from nothing. But tonight, they had crossed the line that separated property from person. The water caught the light in shifting patterns, glittering like liquid silver. Samson remembered all the names he'd been called: the fat ox, the useless hog, the fool too slow to save himself. Yet here he sat, on free soil, with his family intact. They said the fat man couldn't run, couldn't fight, but he carried 4 souls through hell. And when he crossed that river, not even God could tell who was slave and who was free. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.